So the news broke some 65 minutes ago, and what we speculated to be true eventually is true. And I want to go back to and give complete and total credit to Matt Hiblin. Matt Hiblin, for those of you who are thinking, I know the name Matt Hiblin. How do I know the name Matt Hiblin? Matt Hiblin, of course, was the producer extraordinaire for the Dave Wilson radio show back when he was doing one on WIBC. Matt is still the executive producer for WIBC. And sometime midway through this NFL season, I was back loitering near Matt's office when the news came overhead.
That's what you call it?
That's right.
You don't call it gossiping like high school teenage girls?
We have a Diamond Dogs session in there.
Oh.
So
I apologize to any dog that just barked.
We were sitting there chatting, and the news comes out that Daniel Jones is being released mid-season by the New York Giants. Not unprecedented for that to happen to a guy that started the year as a starting quarterback, but certainly rare. And Matt Hiblin looked right at me right then and said, "You know what's going to happen?" I said, "What?" He said, "He's going to sign with the Colts. In week 4 next year, Anthony Richardson's going to get hurt. Daniel Jones is going to take over, and he's going to be the starter the rest of the season." Now, I don't even know if it's going to happen in that fashion. I think Daniel Jones may have just been signed as the Colts starter. And I know that the Colts can say otherwise, and we will analyze it from every angle over the next 3 hours. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison here as well. It's Query and Company on this absolutely perfect spring Tuesday in Indianapolis. And there is plenty to unpack in terms of the Colts free agency that's not yet free agency, the tampering that is now legal but not yet official. And yesterday, the big news, of course, was that the Colts went out and shored up their defensive backfield. Now, I'm going to do this in order and then culminate it with the Daniel Jones stuff, okay? This is the one thing, I'm not going to say that bothers me, but that I find interesting, amusing. We'll just go during the timeline of which I've worked at this radio station, because I was doing the morning show with Kevin, and during that time, one of the clips that we used to play often from Chris Ballard was talking about Bowen and wideouts. Every time I hear and read freaking Bowen, it's about wideouts, Ballard would say. And then eventually, after everybody in the city was jumping up and down saying they need to get wide receivers, and in 2019, when they passed on Terry McLaurin and they passed on DK Metcalf and they went with Rock Ya-Sin, eventually, they found it where they had to go out and they took care of and started addressing the wide receiver position. They drafted Michael Pittman Jr. They drafted Josh Downs. They drafted A.D. Mitchell. We'll see what happens there. They drafted Alec Pierce. So they started addressing the wide receiver position. But it was literally after, at minimum, 2 years of everybody jumping up and down saying they need to get wide receivers, and the Colts saying, we know what we need, and wide receiver right now is not one of them. Okay. Then after that, it became left tackle. The Colts need to draft a left tackle. What are they doing at left tackle? They got to get a left tackle. Now, kudos to Chris Ballard. He went and got Bernard Ryman, and there were question marks there, and it looks like that was a solid pick. But it came after everybody had been addressing it or jumping up and down for it for a while. Last year, heading into the offseason, everybody was saying the Colts really need to shore up their defensive backfield. The Colts really need to shore up their defensive backfield. No, I like our guys. I like our guys. And I will give Ballard the benefit of doubt here when he said, we have a bunch of defensive backs, but I don't know who we have until we see them play. Fair. So we'll give him that benefit. He saw them playing clearly, like everybody else had been saying going into it. What everybody was telling him in his ear, where he said, no, that's not the case yet, was then validated because he looked at it and said, I've got to do something about our defensive backfield. So what does he do through free agency? Goes out and immediately gets a corner that can play man and can be a shutdown corner that is still relatively young, although corners can fall off a cliff quickly. But they got a guy in Ward that I think you have to think is an upgrade at the position at corner. Then he got a safety, I think, in Cam Bynum out of Minnesota that plays in a style that seems like it fits with what Lou Anarumo likes to do, and I'm going by people who know this far more intimately than I, that he is a wide-range safety that can play in a defense that is more aggressive and I guess more physical than with Anarumo than what they did previously. So those are thought to be two good areas. They took care of defensive backfield. That's cool. Now, the other thing they did is maybe to make room for that and the move that we're about to talk about, Will Fries goes to Minnesota, 5-year, $88 million. Ryan Kelly goes to Minnesota, 2-year, $18 million. Those are two positions that, what's that?
$9 million. 2 for 9 for Kelly.
I thought it was 2 for 9 per year.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So 2.9 for Kelly. But either way, Ryan Kelly was one that I was surprised actually they gave him 2 years in Minnesota. Solid guy, solid
you're
player.
right. 9 was guaranteed. I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
I knew 9 was in there somewhere.
Where's that mute button over there? Okay. So either way, Ryan Kelly, 2 years, right? So, and then Dio, they let go, and he got 3 at 48 for Chicago. I understand it. Now what you have is a year after everybody was jumping up and down saying they need to address defensive backfield, and it was, no, actually, we need to see what we have at defensive backfield. Now they're addressing defensive backfield. Now we have shifted to where the offensive line, and I like the line that they have. Ryman, Nelson, Bortolini, I think, is clearly your center, right? Gonzalez, and then Smith. But you've got on the right side a guy that didn't play for the better part of last year in Braden Smith. You're hoping that he stays healthy. You've got Bortolini, who I thought was very effective at the center position, and that's a good draft pick. Kudos to them for making that draft pick, a guy that, coming out of college could play a couple of different areas and has for them. And then Nelson and Ryman on the left side, you're very solid there. But they have no depth at line now. They're going to have to go out and get a couple of Swiss Army-type interchangeable linemen, because what do we know about linemen? Sunglasses and phone chargers, man. You cannot have too many of them. You're going to lose them. You're going to break them. That's the way it goes. I like the line as it stands right now, but they've got now to go out and address depth. And then that takes us to the big fish, the big kahuna. I'm going to make a declaration right now on this. What is this? The 12th day of March, 11th day of March?
11th.
Okay.
Oh, the mute button's off now. I can talk again.
That's right. On this March the 11th of 2025, and I, Jake Query, have made proclamations on this radio program in the past. Some have been correct, some have been incorrect. More often than not clairvoyant, but occasionally a swing and a miss. And a lot of people misunderstood it when I guaranteed that Indiana was going to go up and shock the world 2 years ago at Michigan. I was mistaken. In terms of how that was understood, I said first quarter. They're going to go and win the first quarter, and people took that as the game and whatever. I also a year ago said that Liatu Latu was going to be the defensive rookie of the year. I was very high on that pick. I thought through camp he looked like he was going to be a really good player, and he still may be, but it didn't happen, obviously, in the rookie year. But I actually believe, even though there are caveats to what I'm about to say, I think Daniel Jones is going to come to Indianapolis. I think Daniel Jones is going to be the starting quarterback in Indianapolis. And I think Daniel Jones is going to show why the New York Giants had confidence in him at one time. He is a guy that has completed 64% of his passes during the time that he's been in the NFL. He was with a team that had, during the time that he was the quarterback, and maybe part of that's on him, but they didn't have a lot of weapons around him. There seemed to be a lot of instability around him. His best offensive weapon is one that was hurt, and then they let him go and walk to Philadelphia. I think Daniel Jones is going to come to Indianapolis and at $14 million a year. And here's the key point. I made this point yesterday. And yes, I said 20. I was off on the numbers. But when you start talking about a $14 million a year contract, that is an awful lot to pay a guy to say, we want you to just come in and push this guy and wake him up. Anthony Richardson better get notice. The Colts just signed a quarterback to come in here and take his job. He's already won step one. He's already won step one, which is the Colts have more financially invested in Daniel Jones, maybe not literally in totality, but to pay $14 million for a guy to come in, you don't pay that for a guy to come in and say and show that you need to be in the building by 6:30 and then hold a clipboard on Sundays. You don't. Daniel Jones right now, if Anthony Richardson is continued to be handed the keys, Daniel Jones is the most expensive backup quarterback in the National Football League. And the reason that is because he was not signed to be a backup quarterback. He was signed to be their starter. If that means that Anthony Richardson suddenly now, the Colts have tried everything else. They've tried every motivational tactic possible for Anthony Richardson. They benched him. They publicly called him out. They had team captains saying you can't do a helmet tap. They've done everything that you're supposed to do to wake a guy up and tell him to start. And Anthony Richardson, I'm not saying is a bad person, but to make it clear to him that just because he was drafted 4th overall, the franchise was not his. And now they finally got real about it and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to send the message by bringing in a guy that is going to show up. And instead of a guy showing up where Anthony Richardson looks and goes, you're 40, what? Or instead of a guy showing up and Anthony Richardson saying, aren't you the guy that, like, when Jeff Saturday was in here, Jim Irsay, like, all of a sudden said was going to start, and you started for, like, 2 games, and then it got – instead of those guys being in the room with him now, it's a guy that's walking in, and Richardson says, they paid you what? And you were drafted where? And you have how many career starts, and your completion percentage is what again? But the downside of it is this. Hypothetically speaking, if Daniel Jones works out, and I think he's going to. I actually do. But when I say worked out, I mean by Indianapolis standards. I think he works out and they go 10-8. Great. Wild card, here we come. But in comparison to what we've dealt with here for, the last 5-6 years, whatever, you'll take it, right? But I think Daniel Jones is going to come here, play. I think eventually he's going to start. And I think they're going to win enough games to be interesting. And then they're in a predicament where they're like, okay, now instead of a $14 million backup, what we have is a $14 million starter, pretty good value, and a backup that we put all of our eggs for 2.5 years into. What do we do with that guy? And do we extend Daniel Jones now? Do we franchise tag him? The ceiling for Daniel Jones, what I'm saying is the ceiling, I'm not saying is this is a guy that's going to get you where you need to go, but it's going to make you potentially competent and relevant. But what is competent and relevant in today's NFL standard? Well, for Indianapolis, it's different than elsewhere because they've been incompetent and irrelevant now for like 5 years. I actually do like the signing because I think he's a guy that's going to play well. But I don't think he's a guy that's going to play well to the point of elevating you to being competitive towards, as Jim Irsay said, getting multiple Lombardis. But it beats the alternative. I am convinced, Eddie, and you tell me if you disagree. And I know that and Stephen Holder is going to join us at 1 o'clock, and he can tell me that I'm flat out wrong on this. But I'm going to go back to, you're paying $14 million for a guy, and yes, maybe that's market value for a guy that has starting experience, but you're paying $14 million for a guy to come in for a year. You are doing more than coming in and saying, we are paying you. You don't pay $14 million for competition. You pay $14 million to a guy that you think is going to be your starter.
Well, that and you're actually paying for an open competition that Chris Ballard pointed out at the draft combine when they were talking about Anthony Richardson in next season. And the fact that there will be competition brought in and it will be open. Like, you don't commit $14 million to somebody with just over $13 million guaranteed if you don't aren't planning on giving him an actual chance.
Correct.
At winning the job.
Yes, correct. It's not window dressing, right?
Yeah.
This is big boy for real stuff.
Whereas, Kevin Bowen, James Boyd, you, and JMV have all said it's Anthony's team. They're just going to, you have to live and die with your pick of your former 4th overall pick of Richardson moving forward. And that everything on the wall says it's not going to actually be a competition up until this point.
I think we said that until when they benched him this year. You remember I was out of town, but when they benched him before the Minnesota game, I sent a tweet that said it's over. Now, then they gave him the job back, and yes, I would agree that where he was drafted and because they invested in him and believed in him, that when they said open competition, it was like, okay, well, prove it. Now that they've signed a guy for $14 million, that tells me. So I'm hedging here, right? But that tells me this is not even about open competition, Eddie. I think he's going to be the starter. Otherwise, you would have gone out, and I don't know who it would have been that would have been out there and been available for lesser money, but you would have gone out and said, okay, we can get a veteran at a lesser price and to push and to present window dressing. But you're giving a guy $14 million, and I'm not saying $14 million. In today's NFL, $14 million for a quarterback, I mean, Josh Allen just got, 55? But in terms of, Justin Fields got 20. But that's an expensive backup.
Tom Pelissero of NFL Network just tweeted out 5 minutes ago that he talked with Anthony Richardson's agent, De'Eric Jackson, and he said that Anthony has no desire to request for a trade, looks to compete with Daniel Jones for the starting spot, and, quote, AR will be ready to roll.
Yeah, okay. Good. They paid $14 million for that quote. Right?
Yeah.
Benching him didn't work. If AR wasn't ready to roll by now, $14 million just bought that. That's the most expensive match of all time. That's the most expensive Zippo lighter ever purchased. Because that's what it apparently cost to light a fire under him. And I like Anthony Richardson. I don't know him personally, but he seems like a good young person. He's there's no question he's talented. But it did feel like what I'm getting at is this. And this is the easiest way to say it. I think that the Colts were tantalized by the potential of Anthony Richardson. And I think that the Colts, in the time that Anthony Richardson has been on the field, have seen the flashes and the glimpses of what he could become. But I think they were becoming increasingly aware of the fact that he is not a guy long-term that you can win with. But they had to create for themselves every base covered because of where they drafted him and because of the attachment that he has to the general manager's fate. They had to make it known to their fan base, to the league, to anybody else, that they were not easily parting ways with the notion of him. I'm not saying him, but with the notion of him being their future. And so they had to be able to present to their fan base, to their ticket buyers, and for the general manager, to the owner, that they exhausted all efforts to make sure that they did everything before moving on from that and waving the white flag on their experiment going awry, because there's too much riding on that experiment. And if you say, well, we just decided that we hadn't seen enough, you could say, well, he's only started X number of games. Yeah, but we benched him, and then he didn't seem to get the message. But you put him back in the starting position after that. Now you can say it because you can say, look, we brought in a $14 million backup, and he still didn't win the job, so therefore we have exhausted all options, and we're going in another direction. And he may win the job. Maybe he does. Maybe he does. I don't think he does, though.
If he doesn't win the job, then, he's done, first of all. Second of all, then that means he's never going to be a franchise quarterback if he can't beat out Daniel Jones.
Correct. But that's not unprecedented. I mean, listen, Eddie, there are plenty of quarterbacks in the national. Matter of fact, quarterbacks selected in the top 5, more often than not. Where was Daniel Jones drafted?
I think he was 8th, maybe.
Top 10 pick.
Mm-hmm.
So there are plenty of quarterbacks that become serviceable players elsewhere, but they're not a franchise quarterback. Daniel Jones is one of them.
Sixth,
okay. And so, Zach Wilson, who what's he on, team number 3 now? He was the second overall pick. And the knock on him was that he, didn't work hard, et cetera, that he was, a guy that came in and just thought that it was automatically handed to him. I'm not saying that's – I don't think Anthony Richardson is arrogant. I think Anthony Richardson is strictly naive. And when I say naive, I mean literally because he is very young and came in and has been in positions from the get-go because of his incredible God-given unique talent and athleticism, has been put in positions where he has been prematurely handed the keys without ever having to go through the proper steps of earning it, so to speak, at no fault of his, and not really at the fault of the people who have handed that to him. That's the legitimacy of getting tantalized by it and looking at it and saying and wondering what could be. Anthony Richardson, again, as I've said, is football Jonathan Bender. You keep giving him chances, and you want it so badly to work out because you look at it and you go, this guy could be a game changer in terms of the league. But injuries, whatever else, in my opinion, the first step was when he was removed as the starter after they had been adamant that he was the guy. And then, yes, they put him back in there and said that, like, he woke up and whatever else. But then when they said open competition and now have paid $14 million for a guy to come in, then unless Daniel Jones basically goes out and through the preseason looks like the accuracy of, say, Anthony Richardson, then I think Daniel Jones is your starter. A lot of football, obviously, between now and then. But that's how I would see it. And I'll tell you who owes Daniel Jones a thank you card. I'll tell you who owes Daniel Jones and Chris Ballard right now, and Anthony Richardson. Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson, Chris Ballard, all three of them, no matter where they are respectively right now at this moment. Anthony Richardson's probably, I would assume, in Florida. Chris Ballard is probably, I assume, either on West 56th Street or working from home in Westfield. And Daniel Jones, I would assume, is probably, I don't know, if he's driving here from Minnesota, where he most recently was, he's probably somewhere around, I don't know, going through Madison currently. Or if he's on a plane, he's in an airport somewhere. I just hope if it's our airport that he's eaten before he gets here. But either way, those three should get a merry minstrel, a singing telegram, a bouquet of flowers, a thank you card, a huge thing of balloons, a tray of Taylor's Bakery cookies, all saying a huge thank you. And then when they look at it and say, who sent us this, they're all going to go, that makes perfect sense. And I'll tell you who and why next. This on the X Post Twitter, by the way, which I appreciate because, like I said, I'm like, look, I will totally admit if I'm wrong here, and I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying. This from WizKids Rebuild on the X Post Twitter. Listening to the fan, and I realized that Query has never watched Daniel Jones play football. Talking about elevating the offense and perhaps franchise tagging him since he'll do so well. And then like 20 laughing emojis. Again, let me clarify. I'm not saying he's going to elevate the offense and play so well. What I'm saying is if he did do that, that's what I'm saying. If he does hypothetically take over and plays well and gets them to like a 10-8 mark or gets them into the playoffs, then they're going to be in a predicament because that would officially turn the page on Anthony Richardson. But he's on a one-year deal. So do you franchise tag him at that point because of you're kind of painted into a corner? That's what I'm saying. Now, in terms of you're convinced I've never seen Daniel Jones play football, what I'm telling you is I'm convinced I have seen Anthony Richardson play football. And at this point, there are absolutely glimpses, but he has not shown the consistency to be able to hand the keys over to him, or else you wouldn't have just paid $14 million for a backup. That's simply my point. But all three of those guys that I just mentioned probably should get a floral thank you bouquet today from, Eddie, would you like to guess who should send it over?
Chris Ballard?
From the Indiana Pacers. Chris Ballard is one of them that should get it. Ballard, Anthony Richardson, and Daniel Jones, all three should get thank you bouquets from the Indiana Pacers. Dear Chris, wanted to thank you for the fact that you stole the headlines at 10:55 today, even though free agency was going to be the dominant conversation, because this way people are not paying attention to what happened last night in Chicago. Thanks so much, Indiana Pacers.
Was this a situation where no matter what Ballard did, he was going to receive flack? Like if they sign Justin Fields, but they give Justin Fields, $20 million a year. Is he going to get pushback on it? Like, oh, you just gave Justin Fields $20 million and you're wasting him on a guy who may or may not start?
I think whatever player, well, if they gave Justin Fields 20, they're paying him to start. Right?
Yes.
But yes, to your point, if they would have signed, I don't know what free agent quarterbacks are out there.
Jameis Winston.
Again, I think Winston's another one that people would assume you would have to sign to avoid the flack. If you were going to bring in a quarterback that would have, quote, been for the competition of starter, but at the same time not created the getting flack of, hey, you paid for a guy that, clearly you're bringing him in to be the starter, it would have to be somebody who is a career backup. And I'm looking to see
Trey Lance.
Yeah, that's not bad. Somebody like that, Jacoby Brissett.
Taylor Heineke.
Heineke's a good one. A guy like that, right? A guy that Mason Rudolph, somebody whose job primarily in their career has been to come off the bench and play as a donut tire 4 to 6 games. If you did that and you brought in that guy, then people would say like, okay, so, they are allegedly creating competition. You bring in somebody with this price tag, it just insinuates or it leads credence to the fact of they may be turning the page here. And I may be totally wrong, and I will tell you if I'm totally wrong. But if you are asking as a radio host, Jake, because this happens to me all the time, anywhere I go, people are going to come up and say, what do you think about the Colts signing? And it may be wrong what I think, but what I think is the amount of money that they just gave Daniel Jones, who was a top 10 pick, who is looking for a second lease on life, the amount of money they gave him, that tells me that they are bringing him in here with the understanding and the full reality that they are willing to make him the starter. And I think based on that, he is going to be the starter because I think in camp he is going to show better completion percentage than Anthony Richardson. And the things that Richardson can do, well, yeah, but Anthony Richardson, though, yeah, he doesn't have a great completion percentage, but he can run the football. So can Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones might be a poor man's Anthony Richardson, but he's a poor man's Anthony Richardson who does better the one thing that Anthony Richardson does not do, which is the biggest thing they're looking for, which is consistency of completion percentage. Do I think Daniel Jones is a guy that's going to lift the Colts out of the ashes into prominence? No, that's what I said. I think he lifts them into 10-8 wild card. Hey, that's great. But the other thing that Daniel Jones does, which is the best thing that he's done so far already, the biggest contribution he's made to the Indianapolis sports market, is that he prohibits us from mentioning the fact that last night the Pacers had a game where nobody had more than 5 assists. Or last night the Pacers had a game where, and I don't understand this, to be honest with you, but Jarace Walker, to me, a guy that at the beginning of the year, I was wondering, gosh, are we at the point of turning the page on Jarace Walker? And then he started getting minutes, and I thought started to look comfortable. If there's one thing Jarace Walker last night, to me, could have provided, and the Pacers would know better than I why he wasn't given that chance, but at least put him on Josh Giddey and say, you know what, this guy's going for 11 of 18 from the floor and is setting the pace here offensively for Chicago. Let's get a bigger body on him and see what we can do to try to slow him down. And I also understand the strategy from Rick Carlisle late in the game. By the way, I've never seen this before. Have you ever seen a guy airball a dunk?
No.
I think last night James Johnson airballed a dunk. Have you ever seen that?
No.
And maybe it was just to test if I was still watching. I don't know. But late in the game, 3 or 4 minutes left, I think it was one of those where he thought he was going to go up for a dunk, and then at the last minute decided maybe he wanted to lay it up, and he got confused in midair, and I think he airballed a dunk.
Well, he probably got in midair and realized, oh, bleep, I'm not making it up there.
That's entirely possible because I told you, when I retired from playing basketball, and I used to play a ton of basketball. Now, am I comparing myself to an NBA player? Of course not. But for me, the end came one time when I went up for a putback that I'd put back 1,000 times in my life. And just as I went up for it, all of a sudden some young buck elevated beyond me and just kept elevating. And I thought, whoa, what's happening here? And I thought, it's over. I was like 42 at the time, and it's over. Maybe you're right. Maybe he went up thinking like, well, this is easy. And then thought, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Just like the good old days back when I was with the Dallas Mavericks and Miami Heat. This is easy.
That's right.
Whoops.
But they went to the bench and cleared it out early, and, just probably one of those games that you write off as, hey, you know what, it's the third of 3 on the road, except for that the precedent of the previous 2 against Atlanta did not go well. And without Tyrese Halliburton, their offense is coming to a grinding stop. The Siakam was very pedestrian last night.
All the starters were bad last night.
Yeah, Turner hits him, at least can shoot from the outside. But, Ben Mathurin, you've got to get more from Benedict Mathurin. As a matter of fact, Rick Carlisle was on this morning. I thought he said something very interesting about Benedict Mathurin. Benedict Mathurin is a guy that I think the Pacers are leaning into to mature more because, again, where he was drafted, right? And he's been and shown signs of being a very good player. But in terms of where he fits, is he your 6th man? Is he your 3rd starting, scoring starter? Aaron Nesmith has done a good job with that role lately. But the morning show this morning, Kevin Bowen asked Rick Carlisle in his weekly Tuesday appearances on this radio station what he thought of the kind of up and down of Benedict Mathurin, and Carlisle raised an interesting observation about Mathurin.
A lot of points one game and not a lot the next. And he's an aggressive young player. I spent a lot of time with him in the gym over the last week as he's prepared to come back. He did a lot of really good things, but it's not all about points. And last night our entire starting group struggled, and he was one of them. And tonight's a quick turnaround. So I talked to him a little bit after the game about some of the stuff that went on. The stuff with officials and him constantly talking to officials is stuff that's got to stop. Creates a distraction for him, a distraction for our team. We need him very badly right now, but we need all our guys to be undistracted and playing at their best level. And so this will be a great opportunity for him to bounce back tonight as well.
I thought that was interesting because the part about getting on the officials is that, to me, you can take that as they're coming down hard on Benedict Mathurin, but number one, it's warranted. I mean, this is a guy that has missed time due to suspension for making contact with an official. But number two, that leads to that's the proof that they want Mathurin to be seen as a leader. I don't know that you say that when he says that's a distraction and it's a distraction for our team. It's a distraction for the team because that means that guys are looking to him. I don't know that you say that about, Johnny Furphy's talking too much to the officials. Is anybody noticing? And that's no disrespect to Furphy. You get what I'm saying. That is Rick Carlisle saying to Benedict Mathurin, we need you to be a better leader. And he has that persona about him, does Mathurin, of being kind of impervious to like the pressures of a moment and being a guy that can be very locked in. But locked in doesn't mean getting distracted by something like that, and they need him to, by example, show that the distractions are not going to pull him away from being locked in. And I don't know that you say that to every player, except for the players that you expect when they're on the floor to be the one of the five that are on the floor that is the one that the other four are looking towards for leadership. And that's what I think he's saying right there about Mathurin.
It's just maturity. That's all it is at the end of the day. It's just like he's got to become a more mature player on the court, because when you don't have Tyrese Halliburton out there, he has to be the offense
Correct.
for the Pacers. And
they
already aren't great defensively.
Siakam is obviously their – with Halliburton out, Siakam is their first offensive piece, but Mathurin is the guy that then with unit number two he's the leader of unit number two. He's the Halliburton of unit number two.
Yeah.
Right?
And if he's complaining and talking and griping to the officials about not getting foul calls or being called for a foul, then you're playing 5-on-4. Like, it's either offensively you've got 4 and on their against their 5, or defensively you're with 4 players because Mathurin's checked out.
I heard something on the way in that I think needs clarification, because it's always interesting when you have a big-time story within a sports market and you have multiple people hearing multiple things about what's happening. And I'll tell you the latest on what I've been hearing on a major storyline that was also discussed, I believe, this morning on the morning show. We'll get into that. Stephen Holder joining us. We'll continue watching the NFL clock on what may happen and continue the discussion on Daniel Jones. Holder in 18 minutes. This from Giddy Paul, the director of Giddiness. Jake, I've got to disagree with you on Daniel Jones. The first time I've disagreed with you. Jones does have a better completion percentage than Richardson, but his winning percentage is far below Richardson. Richardson is 500 as a starter with subpar passing stats and is working hard to fix the problems. I don't know whether he's working hard to fix the problems or not. He may be. I don't know that.
It also comes back to this question: is wins a quarterback stat?
Right. In terms of the winning,
like you can't sit there and tell me that Daniel Jones would have had a winning record, or that I don't know, Anthony Richardson would still be 500 if he was in New York with what he was working with.
Right. Jones is a little better than average at passing, but far below 500, not to mention a team without a quarterback in the Giants saw enough to say goodbye to him. Totally fair. Totally fair. All I'm saying is when he says, I think it'll be a fair battle, but to say Jones is the starter, I believe is false. What I'm saying is they paid him like a starter. That's all I'm saying. They are paying Daniel Jones like a starter. Whether or not he wins that job, I don't know, but they paid him like a starter. Now, the other thing I wanted to get into real quick, and Stephen Holder is going to join us in 10. We'll get back into the conversation. And by the way, today's weather outside looks like how Giddy Paul sounds, right? Like you look outside your window and you're like, that is Paul, the director of Giddiness, right there. Today's weather.
Yeah.
The Indiana coaching search.
Jake, it's San Diego outside right now, right?
It's like this 363 days a year in San Diego. Can you imagine? Here, I'm just going to tell you everything as I know it on the Indiana coaching search, which isn't a lot, but I'm pretty confident in the things I'm about to say. And I alluded to this earlier, and I don't think that I'm in like any sort of a violation because it's not like I looked at a contract and would know. I'm just repeating what I've been told. And here's the thing. When you do what we do for a living, people tell us stuff all the time, like anybody else. That doesn't make me special. I mean, anybody. You know, you go to a ball game, you go to the grocery store, you go to pick up a pizza, and you start chatting with people. And they go, oh, I've heard this, da-da-da. But when you start to talk to people, this has always been the test for me. In any situation, when you're trying to find out information or you're trying to find out the accuracy of rumor, etc., oftentimes you start to connect dots when you talk to, and I don't mean that you overhear. I mean when you reach out to and you talk to people who you trust, who would have knowledge of something, and you say, let me tell you what I'm hearing, and then I want you to tell me if I'm off base here. And you throw it at them. When you start doing that with multiple people that would not be in talking to one another, and both of them are telling you the same thing, then you start to think, okay, there may be something here. And I'm going to give you 3 names with the Indiana coaching search. Number 1, and listen, for Indiana fans that are listening, I realize you're going to roll your eyes, and for Purdue and Butler and Ball State and Evansville and Indiana State and Kentucky and Louisville fans that are listening, which, by the way, it's hard to believe there's actually that many people. But I know that you're going to laugh and be like, come on. I'll start with Brad Stevens. I go back to when the report came out that said Brad Stevens is not a candidate at Indiana. And then when you read that article, you read that, and I always forget if it's Jeff Goodman or Jeff Pearlman. My apologies, but it's one of those two who are both very reputable guys. But the headline of Brad Stevens, the headline's not written by the person that writes the article. The headline was Brad Stevens, which one?
It's Jeff Goodman, Ron Perlman.
What's that?
It's Jeff Goodman, Ron Perlman.
But there's Jeff Pearlman too, right?
No, you're Ron Perlman. That's who I was just calling you.
Stay classy, San Diego. So Jeff Goodman has the tweet that says Brad Stevens is not a candidate at Indiana. Then you read the article, and the article simply says that when he reached out to Brad Stevens about the Indiana job, Brad Stevens' response was, I love the people I work with in Boston. I'm paraphrasing. Brad Stevens himself did not say, I'm not a candidate at Indiana. That's two totally different things. The headline is written by somebody usually who does not have anything to do with the story. They're an editor. It is my understanding the Boston Celtics are in the process of they are for sale as an organization. What I've been told, and I'm not saying it is fact, but I've heard it now from multiple people that would have this kind of knowledge that do not know one another. It is my understanding that Brad Stevens, in his capacity as an employee and an executive of the Boston Celtics, has I don't know the wording I'm looking for here. I'll use he has a stake in the organization that would vest or that would pay him great compensation upon sale, so long as he is still a member of the franchise at the time of sale. If he leaves the franchise before it is sold, the stock that he has in the franchise, for lack of a better phrase, would not vest fully, where he would not then get the little snippet that he is owed as part of the ownership. That's my understanding. I don't know that. I'm not saying that that's factual and that I've seen the contract, but I've heard that pretty reputably and reliably. Thus, he cannot commit to anything until a sale would happen. So I don't know, and I'm not saying that that means that that's the holdup and that he wants to come to Indiana, but he can't even begin the process of thinking about working for anyone other than the Boston Celtics until the Celtics are sold. If they're sold in 6 weeks, that changes everything. If they're sold tomorrow, that changes everything. If the sale doesn't happen for a year, then obviously that's a closed door. But I don't think it's that door is entirely closed because of that odd caveat. Secondly, Dusty May. Dusty May's extension in Michigan and buyout in Michigan were not as out of the ballpark as people would have expected, although I do believe that he is going to stay in Ann Arbor and is not still on the list. But I don't think that that's the overwhelming reason. I think Dusty May just would like to stay at Michigan. And the other one is Chris Beard. I know that there's been a lot of report out there from people who are very reputable and very knowledgeable and probably work on this closer than I even in regards to Chris Beard, who worked for Bob Knight at Texas Tech, who was on staff with Pat Knight and Bob Knight at Texas Tech, who went to Texas, who was fired from Texas after an arrest for domestic violence that then charges were not pressed on him. And then he was hired by Ole Miss. During the cycle for Michigan, Louisville, and Kentucky, he did not interview with those schools. It is my understanding, and this is the one that I am the absolute most confident in saying publicly. I don't know Chris Beard. I've never met Chris Beard. I know people that know Chris Beard. But it is my 100% understanding that Chris Beard is absolutely not a candidate at Indiana and will not be processed as such. And so I know that there has been chatter that he is moving up the ranks partially because of the attrition of other candidates. That's the one that I don't believe, that I am confident in saying I do not think Chris Beard, at least the people that I know who would know, they have unanimously told me, no, Chris Beard is not a candidate at Indiana. I still maintain, and I know the guy at West Virginia is starting to get some conversation. He had come from Drake, I believe, had a lot of success at Drake, went to West Virginia, has had a good year there. Obviously, Ben McCollum, who's at Drake, but Ben McCollum's style seems like there are other schools that might be a better fit for him. I still maintain that the guy that is Indiana Safety School, whose name is the only one that has never really fallen off the list, is Brad Brownell at Clemson. Because he's an Indiana guy. He's won 65% of his games. He just won the ACC. They're having the best year that Clemson's had. He's a good coach. He doesn't blow you away, but he's a good, solid coach. Stephen Holder joins us other side. You know, it's perfectly fitting that you would play this music. You know why, Eddie?
Because Chris Ballard's going crazy.
That, and he has done multiple signings with Minnesota. Not multiple, but we've seen multiple from players that were in Minnesota, which is, of course, the home of Prince.
They should have just traded.
Honestly, right? Because you've got a couple of guys going there. They probably are getting their real estate agents on the line like, hey, you want to swap places to live? And Stephen Holder, in the only good suggestion that I have ever made to anybody in my life, and it wasn't me, it was actually Shannon. When Stephen Holder was in Minneapolis, we've discussed it before, but it was Shannon's suggestion that he go to Paisley Park, and nobody ever does that, right? When people are like, hey, I'm going somewhere, and you're like, you know what, you got to do this. Nobody ever follows through. Stephen Holder did. Said Paisley Park was very cool. That is the residence and office studio for Prince. Stephen joins us now on a very busy time from ESPN.com, of course, and he joins us on the always busy and available for your business to sponsor guest line. Stephen, I'll begin with this. Daniel Jones, your initial reaction. Go.
Yeah, well, quick thing. You're right. People always do say that, right? You should do this, but you really should go to Paisley Park, just for the record. So anyway, with that, I think Daniel Jones is exactly the type of quarterback they were always destined to get. And if you are among the fans who thought they could do better or would do better, well, shame on you for thinking that, because this is where they're at. I mean, look, if you have an incumbent starter, whether Anthony Richardson remains the starter, we'll see. But when you have an incumbent starter who is the fourth overall pick just a couple of years ago, and who the team is very heavily invested in, not so much in terms of money, but in terms of time and draft pick and effort, etc., then it's not a great situation for you unless you're just clearly a better player. And so, if you're Justin Fields, you're going to go take the automatic starting job in New York, for example, right? So, I mean, they were always going to get a borderline starter, if at all. And I think Daniel Jones is probably the guy with the most possible upside they could get, I guess. So I know it's not a resounding endorsement of it, but I think it's fine. I think it's exactly where they were and what they were destined to kind of end up with.
To me, Stephen, and I want you to – here's what I said, and I want you to chime in. They gave him $14 million. That makes him automatically the highest paid backup quarterback in the NFL.
Sure.
This, to me, this is different than the window dressing of, look, we're just going to create competition, wink, wink, for Anthony Richardson. This is the ultimate wake-up call. If this doesn't wake up Anthony Richardson, nothing's going to, because you don't pay $14 million for a guy to hold a clipboard. And it leads me to believe that Daniel Jones, in fact, has every chance to be the starter, and I think is going to be the starter. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a good point because, lip service is one thing, but money talks and, the rest of that saying, right? So I would say I actually tend to agree with what you laid out there. I have wondered for a few weeks whether this was more talk than anything else. It's very easy to get up there at a podium and say it's going to be a real competition. It's another thing to lay out $14 million at minimum here. It could be even more if he ends up being the starter. It's another thing to lay out $14 million and put the money literally where your mouth is, right? So they did do that. And I do think that is something we cannot ignore here. So what I see, though, overall, I agree with that assessment. Yes, for Daniel Jones, I think this would, at least in his view, it should be seen as a real competition, and the $14 million, sort of solidifies that. But I think taking sort of the 30,000 foot view of this, what you should have, is two guys who have a great opportunity here. Well, let me put it this way: they're at a crossroads. They're both at a crossroads, right? If Daniel Jones comes in here and he wins this and he plays decent, he may be able to resurrect his career, or at least get it back on track. If the opposite is true, if Anthony Richardson fends off this challenger, if you want to call it that, and wins this job and stabilizes as a player, now maybe he has a future here, right? So this is a defining moment for both of these guys in 2025. It's a defining moment for Anthony Richardson and for Daniel Jones. And we will see who makes the most of that opportunity.
Stephen, the other moves that the Colts have made, and let me, for those that are just joining the program or are unfamiliar with this, I hope you're not bruised from the rock you came out from underneath. But on the way out of town, Dio, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly. On the way in, Cam Bynum, 4 years at $60 million, safety out of Minnesota. And then Charvarius Ward, 3 years at $60 million, who comes from San Francisco, and I think is kind of a lockdown man corner, so to speak. You know, I mean, he's a guy that probably can eliminate a side of the field when he is in a rhythm. Your overall thoughts on what they have done so far and what they have yet to do?
So I think defensively, I love it, and here's why. It is the absolute biggest commitment that Chris Ballard has ever made to the back end of his defense. And there comes a time, there comes a time when you cannot deploy a dollar store secondary and expect to get, high-end results. And occasionally it's like, right, we all do the clearance shopping from time to time. And I think we had a shopping reference on last week's show, so maybe it's me. But anyway, you can shop on the clearance rack and you can find some deals sometimes. You absolutely can. But you can also find something that's irregular or something that just doesn't fit right. And so it really is a roll of the dice. Here you are taking the chance out of it a little bit more. It doesn't mean every free agent signing is going to work. They don't all work out. But you got proven guys here. And this is a commitment to a very important part of the defense, one that Chris Ballard has frankly neglected. He has spent some draft picks, certainly, but he has not spent free agent money to fix that back end. And of late, going back to last offseason, I thought he was a little bit just derelict in how he handled the secondary. We talked about it all offseason. What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you going to do something? And he just didn't. He just frankly decided not to. And I just think that was a very sort of reckless way to handle it. So I think Lou Anarumo came in and watched the film and said, no, we're not doing this. And so there you have a very real commitment to the secondary. So that's huge. Okay, the other point to make is I think the offensive line is in flux here. And let's not overlook that. Will Fries is a really good player. I mean, he's going to get almost $18 million a year. We were hearing, my colleagues and I were hearing something like, 13, 14, 15 million a year. He got even more. So it speaks to the kind of player people think he is. So that means the Colts are going to miss him. When Will Fries got hurt last season, they spent the rest of the season trying to replace him, and they did it very badly to the point they had to get Mark Glowinski, their former starter at that position, off the couch.
Who actually played okay.
He was the best option they used, frankly. So he's not a long-term solution, though, right? So they're going to have a hole there. They got to figure out whether that's something they can fill in-house or if they got to go outside and figure it out. And at center, look, you can move Bortolini in there, slide him in behind Ryan Kelly to fill that spot, and that's great. But as I laid out on Twitter, at minimum, okay, at best, you have a decent starter, but you have eroded your depth, possibly completely your quality depth, right? That is a problem. So they definitely got to work on that offensive line. I don't think you can just pretend that's not an issue.
Stephen, let me tell you one area where I think the fans deserve better. And sometimes I think too critically. I know that's shocking, right? So you talk me off the ledge here if I'm thinking too critically. Fans for multiple years felt like the Colts needed to address the quarterback position, and they kind of did it by Band-Aid, and then ultimately said, you know what, the fans are probably right, and they drafted Anthony Richardson. Fans felt like they needed to address the wideout position, and I think Chris Ballard kind of, via the media, said, no, we're good. I know what I'm doing here. And then after like 2 years, he went out and via the draft started addressing the wide receiver position. Fans started talking about how they needed to address the defensive backfield. And last year it was, look, we got guys and I like our guys and we got to see them play and we're good. And then ultimately it was, and maybe the fans were right. I'm not saying the fans, but you get what I'm saying. Does that mean that we wait another year here for tight end? Because everybody now is clamoring for tight end. It almost seems to me like I'm totally okay with that approach of waiting things out, but there seems to be a little bit of smartest guy in the room mentality ahead of time and then a wave of the white flag. Am I being way too critical here?
No, I do think that he definitely waits until it's absolutely necessary to act in some ways. That is true. What I would say is it's less about the fans as much as, I mean, we're just reacting to what we see as observers, right? So that's where that sentiment is coming from in those observations. But what I would say is it's less about that for Chris Ballard and the Colts as much as them taking it down to the very last possible moment before deciding this isn't working. So in other words, we always use that quote, we like our guys, that Chris Ballard likes to repeat that refrain. And it is very true, probably too much so at times. And what it is him wanting to believe that they have the solution on their roster for whatever that issue might be. And so you give it every opportunity to play out and to see if it will work. And ultimately, in many cases, it has not. But I think there was ample evidence in many cases that it might not work out and that you might need to address it, right? I mean, we knew this when it came to the secondary. We were talking about this before last season because it did seem like they were in a precarious position. But his nature and his inclination, Chris Ballard, is to say, let's see what we got. I want to give these guys every shot, our in-house guys, because we picked them, we believe in them. Well, that's a slippery slope, and we have seen that time and again. So you ask about tight end. All I can say is I think that lesson. I hope that lesson has already been learned. I don't think they need to learn it again another year. They had the worst tight end production in the entire NFL. I'm not kidding. I mean that statistically. The worst tight end production in the passing game in the entire NFL. And so, and then look, I don't know what the status of Mo Alley Cox is right now. I haven't followed up on that one recently, but I mean, he could be out the door. So, I mean, they are going to have to address that. The good news is that is a strength in this draft, and I think they're leaning on that probably pretty heavily right now after spending a lot of money elsewhere.
Stephen, which is more likely true? Stephen Holder from ESPN.com is our guest. When Jim Irsay sent the tweet out, I'm paraphrasing, saying in 42 years in Indianapolis, we've had 14 losing seasons, not good enough. We've had 2 Super Bowl appearances and 1 Super Bowl win, not good enough. Our fans deserve better. Was Jim Irsay saying that in preparation for people to then understand why Chris Ballard was about to become aggressive, or was Chris Ballard becoming aggressive because he had read Jim Irsay's tweet?
Well, he didn't have to read his tweet. He talked to Jim Irsay personally.
Well, I mean, okay, obviously, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know I'm being too literal there, but what I'm getting at is I think this is me talking. I'm not reporting this, but my read of the situation is that Jim Irsay made things very clear. Look, there was. Let me say this: did Jim Irsay consider changes? He absolutely did. And Chris Ballard knows that. Okay, if I know it, then he knows it. You know what I mean? So he's very aware that he's in a precarious situation. And what did Chris Ballard say when we asked him about the substance of his conversations with Jim Irsay? He was very succinct. What did Jim Irsay tell you, Chris? He said, fix it, right? And so I would imagine any good leader would at that point say, what the hell is the plan? What are we doing? How are we going to fix this? So I think it was collaborative, but it was born from the understanding that, buddy, you're on the clock. I mean, this is not sustainable, right? And so there's an understanding there, collaborative, but also instigated by the owner making his position very clear, I think. But one last thing I would add to that, though, is I'll say this for Jarace. There had to be some buy-in on his end too, because they're laying out a lot of cash here. Okay, and it doesn't make him a hero. Look, I mean, he's the richest guy in this town probably, but what I am saying is that took some commitment on his part that maybe he hasn't always shown. They have a big payroll like lots of other teams, but how you go about it in free agency, it requires a lot of upfront cash, and that requires the owner to write checks like today. And so they did do that, and I'll give them credit for that.
Stephen, the offensive line now, and I like their line as it stands right now. I mean, the way that you've got it right now, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, starting from left to right. Ryman, Nelson, Bortolini at center, Gonzalez and Smith on the right side. I like that line, but I don't know that it has the depth that Chris Ballard oftentimes preaches because they've let some of that depth go. And I know that that's a natural part of the game. But have they now created another position of need that they're going to have to stockpile in the draft, which then maybe takes away from elsewhere where they could have put pieces?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I think that's for sure. I would say, look, we'll see what happens with Gonzalez. I mean, I think it probably makes the most sense to do what you laid out there. But he also is their swing tackle, which is a very important position. So, do they feel comfortable? Does he feel comfortable playing guard full time? Is that a good spot for him? I don't know. We'll see. But I agree. The depth has really been tapped here. Your top two backups could end up being starters now. So that creates a whole heap of problems, and you're gonna have to fix it. Now, I do think they can address that in the draft. Now, you can't do it with like a 7th round pick. I mean, you got to be serious about this. If you're talking about guys who are the next guy off the bench, they got to be ready to roll. So you got to be judicious about it, and you can't just take some project. But I do think you can address your offensive line depth in the draft. You can also do it later in free agency, in that second wave, if you're talking about, backup level or competition level types of guys. So I think they can address it. That first 5 is what matters, and they do have the makings of a first 5 that is workable. I think that one of the things they were challenged with here was they have obviously Quentin Nelson on a very big contract, $21 million a year. Braden Smith, I don't know what the new contract looks like, but there's still some investment there. And then next year, if not this offseason, frankly, we'll see. But within the next 12 months, you are going to have to extend Bernard Raymond with a very big contract. Okay, look at what Will Fry's got today. You're talking about a left tackle here. Okay, that's going to be expensive, more than people think. So,
and you know what, Stephen? Listen, I bag on Chris Ballard a lot. That was a solid pick. He's turned into a. They basically threw him in as baptism by fire, and he's done a nice job.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll just wrap it up by saying like that investment in the offensive line is going to get bigger pretty soon here. So they probably will have to go the draft route or find some competition in like the second wave of free agency.
So are we done with the big splashes?
I think so. I do think so. I don't think they're done. Like period. I think they still will have some starting level types of additions to come. I don't know where they're going to be, but they still have been having conversations with people from what I was told. I guess I wonder, do they address tight end at all in free agency? I don't think it's a great class for free agent tight ends, but maybe they need somebody, I would say. And then linebacker is the other question for me. Do you make a move there, and how aggressive do you want to be in the process? So those are the 2 spots that I'm thinking about right now. And then I would say backup running back, although that's one where you can also
it's fungible, right? I mean, you can address that.
Just find a guy. Just find a guy who can do something.
Stephen, lastly, I find this happens with me a lot. Somebody like musically speaking, or maybe even historically speaking, but I'll say more so musically speaking. There will be an artist that I'm familiar with or that, is a household name, and then I'll watch a documentary or a movie or some sort of, or read a biography of them. And then my level of appreciation gets way higher, and I hear their music differently.
Yeah.
When you walked into Paisley Park, when you got out of the car on a 1 to 10 scale, what was your level of fandom of Prince? And when you left Paisley Park and got in your car to go back to the hotel, what was your level of fandom for Prince on a 1 to 10 scale?
Oh, this is a great question. I like Prince. Everybody likes Prince, right? I mean, am I like a super fan? No. I would say I went because you were not the first people to tell me to go there. I had heard about this before. I was like, you know what? I got time. I'm going to go. I left there much more fascinated by Prince than I ever would have been before I went there. I even picked up a coffee table book with like all of his guitars. It's his collection of guitars. I think it's on my coffee table actually right now. And you have to see it to appreciate it, right? And hear the stories. Hear the stories about how he would have jam sessions till like 5 a.m. with random people. Just from like the neighborhood, or whoever was doing a show in town that night, he would show up at the show and say, "Hey, come to my place and we'll hang out." And they would just like play music all night. Or you go into the studio portion of Paisley Park, and they tell you about all of the people who recorded music in that space, literally where you're standing. And everybody from Madonna to you name it, and it is pretty amazing. So when you understand his impact on others and on the industry and just how you learn so much more about his identity, you get so much more of an appreciation. So yeah, he's bigger than just like his song playing on the radio. It's much bigger than that. And so I agree with you. Great question.
Now, Stephen, in conclusion, if you know this answer, just say yes or no. Don't give the answer because I'm going to give it on the air here. Okay.
Okay.
Prince has something in common with the following list. Wait until I read all names. I've mentioned this on the air, I think, once before. Bob Marley, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Bon Jovi, Jimi Hendrix, Roger Daltrey, Bono, Malcolm Young, John Mellencamp, Angus Young, Lou Reed, Flea, Willie Nelson, Billy Joe Armstrong, Eddie Vedder, Iggy Pop, Axl Rose, CeeLo Green, Bruno Mars, Phil Collins, and Kendrick Lamar. He has something in common with all of those. Now, without giving the answer, do you know what the answer is?
I do not know that answer.
Okay.
No. But I'm dying to know now.
I will tell everybody the answer. I think it's fascinating. Prince has something in common with the following. Bob Marley, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Bon Jovi, Jimi Hendrix, Roger Daltrey, Bono, Malcolm Young, John Mellencamp, Angus Young, Lou Reed, Flea, Willie Nelson, Billy Joe Armstrong, Eddie Vedder, Iggy Pop, Axl Rose, CeeLo Green, Bruno Mars, Phil Collins, and Kendrick Lamar. A huge heavy hitter list of musicians. Stephen, you're going to have to then turn on your radio to get the answer because I'm going to let everybody know in a couple minutes. But I appreciate the conversation as always. I know it's busy, and we'll talk to you soon with all the free agency stuff.
All right, you got it.
All right, Stephen Holder joining us on the always busy guest. I will give you the answer. Do you know the answer, Eddie, without saying it?
I think so.
We'll come back with my favorite Prince song, and I will tell you what all of those musical icons have in common that I find fascinating. to admit, oftentimes I get fascinated by things or transfixed on things that I find completely like mind-blowing, and then I'm like, wait a minute, nobody else seems to care.
You getting transfixed on things, Jake? What?
Okay, I'm going to read you this list again. Bob Marley, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Bon Jovi, Jimi Hendrix, Prince, Roger Daltrey, Bono, Malcolm Young, John Mellencamp, Angus Young, Lou Reed, Flea, Willie Nelson, Billy Joe Armstrong, Eddie Vedder, Iggy Pop, Axl Rose, CeeLo Green, Bruno Mars, Phil Collins, and Kendrick Lamar. Now, I'm assuming that you've heard of most of those names, correct, Eddie?
Yes.
Do you know we have tickets to give away, do we not, today?
We have 2 pairs of tickets to give away.
We should give away the first pair right now to anybody that can call in and wants to guess what all of those musicians have in common at 239-1070. If somebody has an idea, maybe they've heard me mention it on the air, 239-1070. If they have an idea as to what those musical acts have in common, Mary Blige concert is when? Mary J. Blige.
It's at Lucas Oil Stadium on April 21st. That is a Monday.
That is big time. April 21st, Lucas Oil Stadium, right? That is a huge show. That is a big deal. And that list of musicians that I listed off, I think I've said this on the air before, so maybe somebody knows the answer because they've heard me say it on the air. But one of those things that, and I have no idea, one day I got curious about something, and I thought, I'm going to look this up because this seems like, and then I looked it up, and I'm like, holy cow. And I have a theory on it as well as to why these people all have this in common. So we're going to begin with who here, Eddie? I will let you pick who we are putting on the air for the chance to win the tickets to see Mary J. Blige on April 24th at Lucas Oil Stadium. Eddie is manning out the last of our suddenly drunk phone lines. One more time on the names. Bob Marley, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Bon Jovi, Jimi Hendrix, Prince, Roger Daltrey, Bono, Malcolm Young, John Mellencamp, Angus Young, Lou Reed, Flea, Willie Nelson, Billy Joe Armstrong, Eddie Vedder, Iggy Pop, Axl Rose, CeeLo Green, Bruno Mars, Phil Collins, Kendrick Lamar. Who are we going with, Eddie?
We'll start with Bobby.
Bobby, what's up?
What's going on?
Bobby, you sound like a nice guy. You've called the show before, right?
I have.
That's what I thought. And if you don't mind me asking, did we give you a title within the company when you called, Bobby?
I do not have a title.
Oh, well, what line of work are you in?
I'm a police officer, so just go ahead and make me sergeant of arms. How about
Are you
that?
really? Well, I'll tell you what. Do you do ride-alongs? Can I do a ride-along? You
sure can, Jake. I'm sure we'll have a good conversation about North Central, too. Class of 98 for me.
Oh, my man. All right. Well, listen, I would absolutely love to do the ride-along. I'm not kidding you. What's your shift, though?
I work day shift. I would have to drop you off so you can make it to work.
That's okay. Are you over the, and, here's the thing. I have a feeling, and this is a police term, at least with my cop buddies. I don't know if this term means anything to you. If you have me, you're going to have a no-hitter.
I'll take that.
Yeah, everybody will take that, right? A no-hitter's when you have no runs in the day. Well, first off, Bobby, I certainly want you to be safe. Do you have a guess as to what all of those people have in common?
I think so.
Okay.
I believe, did they all host the Super Bowl halftime show?
That is exactly what Eddie Garrison's guess was, okay? Now, here's the thing, Bobby. What if I narrowed it down for you and said this? It is something that if you were to pick a couple of them that make it more obvious, certainly Bruno Mars, Kendrick Lamar, and Prince. Those are three that I think are more of the obvious in this list in terms of meeting the criteria.
They've all dated Kim K.
Also an excellent guess. I'll tell you what, Bobby, we're sending you regardless, Bobby, simply because your job is to keep people safe on the streets, which I absolutely love, Bobby, and I want to make sure on April 24th that you are able to enjoy, and I'm not saying it because of Hail Our Panthers, hats off to thee, but I also do want to do a ride-along. But nonetheless, Bobby is one that we will give. Let's go one more here and see if who do we have? Stay on the line, Bobby. Stay on the line. Eddie will get your
We'll go
info.
with Matt.
Matt, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well, Matt. How about yourself? Now, Matt, have you called the show before? You sound like a nice fellow.
Oh, thank you. This is actually my first time.
Is it? Okay. Matt, if you don't mind me
Yeah.
asking, how old a fella are you?
I am 37? 37?
Now, Matt, that
No,
wasn't
yes,
intended to
30,
be a
I'm
trick
37.
question. Okay, Matt is
Yeah,
this is
37.
37-year-old Matt, the math whiz. And Matt, that would mean, I'm guessing, that you graduated high school somewhere around 2006. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
And-
2006.
And that was from what school?
Roncalli.
Ron Colley. Okay, well, that explains the long math trivia there. Okay,
The math
so
problems, yeah.
Matt, do you have a guess, by the way, on what those artists have in common?
Man, the nice fellow before me took my answer. I was going to guess Super Bowl as well.
I will tell you this, Matt. It has nothing to do with their musical resumes.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with the musical resume of those people.
Well, were they all born in the same month?
Oh, that's a good guess, Matt. Good guess. I like the guess. I like the effort. I'll give you one more hint here. You ready?
Yeah.
Basketball star of yesteryear, Nate Archibald, would fit into this category to an extent. Nate Archibald would fit into this category. I'm trying to think of another. Baseball player, shortstop Reese fits into this category.
Yeah, they're not all left-handed, are they?
No, but Matt, because I have strung you along here, I will go ahead
you
and
got me.
we will hook you up, okay? Bobby and
wonderful.
Matt both going to be on their way with the tickets. Here is the answer, which I find fascinating.
I still don't know based off your hints here.
With the exception of Jimi Hendrix, who is the outlier in this group but still qualifies in totality. Everyone that I just mentioned is 5'8" or shorter.
Oh my goodness. You could have put me in this category.
But think about that. Billy Joel's 5'5". Paul Simon's 5'3". Prince is 5'2". Bono's 5'5". Malcolm Young is 5'5". Angus Young is 5'2". Eddie Vedder's 5'7". Bruno Mars is 5'5". Kendrick Lamar is 5'5". I have a theory here, and my theory is that the reason that many of, and I'm not saying that you have to be short to be musically inclined. I do wonder, because they were all very small as kids, how much of them, instead of playing sports as a young person, began getting involved in music at a young age and playing an instrument. And that led to them doing a lifelong commitment between the ages of, let's say, 7 or 8 until they were 18 or 19 and had perfected something that many people never venture into.
Did you say Reese because his first name is Pee Wee?
Correct.
Okay.
Pee Wee Reese or Tiny Nate Archibald. I could have gone with too short on this list, but I
Could
don't
have
know
gone
what
with
his height
Muggsy Bogues. I don't know.
is. Muggsy Bogues. Now, Jimi Hendrix is 5'10". Everybody else on that list is 5'8" or under.
So then why'd you name Jimi Hendrix in that list then?
Because when I made the list, it was everybody who was 5'10" or under. But still, I mean, Bob Marley at 5'7", Bob Dylan at 5'7", Eddie Vedder at 5'7". When you go to see these guys in concert, oftentimes you're like, wow, I didn't realize. The one that really jumped out at me, and you didn't notice it until this year's Super Bowl halftime show, but I noticed with Kendrick Lamar, I'm like, I had never noticed until he was out there. I'm like, he looks small. He's 5'5". There's nothing wrong with any of that. Don't get me wrong. But I truly do believe that their musical genius might have been manifested by the fact that at a young age, when others were out playing basketball and baseball and whatever else, if they were the smallest kid, they decided to venture into another after-school activity and became masters at it. The Colts have a new quarterback, theoretically. We'll discuss and continue to look at free agency next. So Daniel Jones is the most expensive backup quarterback now in the NFL, theoretically, unless, of course, he comes in and becomes the starter for the Indianapolis Colts. And Chris Ballard had said we are going to create a quarterback competition. And I think a lot of us, I am guilty of this for sure, thought, okay, this means one of two things. They are creating a quote-unquote competition. I'm using air quotes. And they're going to bring in Jacoby Brissett or Marcus Mariota or Tyler Heineke, as you had mentioned, Eddie. You know what? A guy that Mason Rudolph. Hell, Mariota might even be more qualified than the list that I expected that would potentially be coming in as the competition for Anthony Richardson. But I think what we have seen is this. Chris Ballard knows that Chris Ballard's fate is potentially attached to Anthony Richardson and the success at the quarterback position, unless Anthony Richardson doesn't work out because he is supplanted by someone who comes in and wows everyone. And you tried benching him to get his attention. You tried telling him that there were things he needed to do. And I want to make very clear here, none of this, am I saying, makes Anthony Richardson a bad human being or even, completely unprofessional. I just think that there is a naivete and an immaturity. And I don't mean immaturity like he's sitting around, making fart noises with his armpits and, throwing spitballs in meetings. I just mean an immaturity like just not knowing better. And this is, as I said earlier, the most expensive $14 million Zippo lighter of all time because you are trying the last gasp to light a fire. But what Chris Ballard has done here is he has gone out to light a fire that at the very least, if it doesn't wake up Anthony Richardson, he has at least a brush fire that he can sit there and keep his hands warm on until they figure out what they're going to do. And if Daniel Jones comes in and plays well, if he wins the job and plays well, and the Colts go to the playoffs, then that might, in fact, be the only way that the Colts can move on from Anthony Richardson and still keep Chris Ballard would be if it's a guy that Chris Ballard selected that actually wins out the job and wins for them. In that scenario, it works for Chris Ballard. Now, if Daniel Jones ends up winning the job and then becomes Carson Wentz, then I got news for you. Biff Ward's phone just lit up because now you got 3 people selling their house. Right? I mean, that's the reality of it. But $14 million, theoretically, is something you pay when you are prepared for that guy to be your starting quarterback.
I know we've talked a lot about Daniel Jones today, Jake, but what do you think about the other 2 signings of Cam Bynum and Jarace Walker?
Yeah, I think so. I do think that it speaks to the influence one would assume that Lou Anarumo has of saying, look, these are the kind of guys that I want. Because I think that it speaks highly towards them making a commitment to their defensive backfield. And I will listen. When it comes to Chris Ballard, I made the point yesterday. Seemingly, it's a year after everybody pines for something that the Colts finally address an area. Mm-hmm. And this feels like that. However, in his defense, and I remember at the time defending and agreeing with what he was saying in principle about this. Ballard said a year ago with the defensive backfield, look, I've got to see these guys play. I like that room. I like what we have. But to be fair, I can't fully embrace what we have until I've seen it play and then have a true idea of it. And I think that he saw in what he saw last year was due to the combination of lack of availability and then sometimes lack of ability.
Yeah.
It was an area that needed to be addressed, and I will give him credit that they are addressing it. Now,
look, these guys got to play.
That's it, right? That's what he said.
Yep.
I mean, these guys, and look, Juju Brents, I like Juju Brents a lot, but the best ability is availability, and he hasn't had that yet consistently. Juju Brents I like. The others, Nick Cross, raw athleticism, but it reminds me again of when they drafted T.J. Green out of Clemson and tried to convert him from corner to safety, and the guy he had all the athleticism, he just had no instinct. Nick Cross at times feels a bit like that. Blackman, again, best ability is availability, and he's been hurt over the course of his time in Indianapolis. I thought last year he took too many chances, and I think they get solid pieces there in Bynum that is a more free-ranging safety and a good last defense safety. And then Ward, I think he is a guy that can lock down and shut down an area of the field. I mean, what do they call it? Mooney Island? Right?
The Revis Island?
Revis Island too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anytime they get a guy, so I do like those moves. Did they overpay? Maybe, but they had to spend somewhere, right?
Your cap's going up every year, so
of course. At least it showed that Ballard looked at it and saw what we all saw, which was, okay, I did give it time. I like Jalen Jones. I think he's a good player.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think personally their defensive backfield room was. To me, it was as much about guys just not being able to be healthy and be out there as it was guys. There wasn't anybody that
depth.
I mean, well, and the problem now is this, Eddie. Problem is probably the wrong word. The challenge now is this. You address your defensive backfield depth, that's good. But what you did in doing so is you created now offensive line depth that needs to be addressed.
My assumption, and I think Stephen Holler briefly mentioned this, that a lot of that depth now, with the way that they spent money right now and having to pay Bernard Ryman and whatever comes down the line with the quarterback position, and then eventually probably have to pay Josh Downs as well, is that you're going to have to start drafting offensive linemen and hitting on those draft picks.
Well, totally.
And so I don't see them going out, at least right now, if they can find somebody on a dirt cheap to contract for depth along the offensive
here's
line.
the thing. So Bortolini, for example, I thought Bortolini was played well at center.
Mm-hmm.
But you move him now from an insurance policy at right guard over to that position. But you have obviously Braden Smith and Gonzalez on the right side of the line, but you don't have really, Dalton Tucker. I think Danny Pinter's a free agent, right? Probably Danny Pinter's price might have gone up just a little bit now because Pinter can. Again, I don't think that Danny Pinter is anything above a 6 probably at any one spot, but he can play a couple of different positions for you on the line, and you're going to need. You don't have a lot of depth.
By the way, you said Braden Smith. Congratulations to Purdue's Braden Smith. Did you see the news?
Is he the Big Ten Player of the Year?
Correct.
Nice. It was going to come down to he or Trey Kaufman-Renn were both viable candidates for that.
Or Vlad Golden at Michigan.
Well, I'm saying in terms of Purdue's representation.
Yeah.
Speaking of basketball, Pacers didn't play it very well last night, but they get a chance to rebound tonight. Scott Agnes will discuss all of that with us next. 70-degree sunny day song. I got shorts on today. I'm wearing shorts. It's midway through March. It's supposed to, I think it's going to snow in 2 weeks. But let me tell you something, Eddie, if you don't mind me saying so, and I'm going to have to jump off headset for just a second while Eddie patches in, I think, Scott Agnes. But let me just back up, Eddie, and you tell me, if you don't mind me saying so, for my age, these are, hold on. Can people see this on the YouTube chat? Those are some sexy legs, aren't they? I mean, I don't have a lot of strong suits, but one of them is I have very, very well-defined legs. A lot of times when I wear shorts, people tell me that that's what they wait. They wait through the winter just for that. They're like, you know what? I'm just glad to see you because you're wearing shorts again.
Well, that and your squeaky clean back, right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah, my back. That's very important to me. I've got the thing with the extended arm, so I can on the back. Yeah. I mean, listen, being a metrosexual sometimes is, it is what it is, right? It's very important to me. Scott Agnes can relate. That he cares about his appearance. Always looks like, I think Scott probably presses his shirts. Scott, do you iron shirts?
I'll steam them. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I mean, I've never seen you wear like wrinkled pants or anything like that. Like, you're a very stylish fellow. Did I already ask you, Scott, when we had this conversation? If I did, just stop me. About the most you've ever paid for a sport coat?
Yeah, we did that last week.
That's what I thought.
I actually had about 3 people bring that up to me. So you never know what clicks with people, right?
It is amazing. What did they agree with you that $895 was a little steep, or were these people of a pricier palate?
No, that was absolutely it. I think the general idea was, a couple $100 seems about right.
Okay, let's begin with this from last night. Pacers in action tonight, taking on the Bucks at the Fieldhouse. Boy, a bad 3-game stretch here. No Tyrese Halliburton. He was really starting to hit stride, and I thought that was a load management rest issue. Clearly it's not. What's the latest on Halliburton that you hear?
Yeah, I was surprised that he missed a couple of games. I think this hip flexor is something certainly new that he's having to deal with, and the biggest thing that physical therapists will tell you is they don't like how this is up the kinetic chain, right? You talk about a hamstring. He's always dealt with back issues. Now you're dealing with hip flexors. It's all seemingly connected generally in one way or the other. That's the one thing you don't like. My general thinking is I think he probably could have returned yesterday, Jake, but you really needed to have him today for certain against the Milwaukee Bucks given the playoff implications. So I would expect for him to play. Now, T.J. McConnell, I was surprised to see him come back too, because once you roll it once, then you're more susceptible for it to happen again, and you really need to lay off of it. But it turned out to be not as bad as he or they thought originally, so he was able to play. But it's definitely what you're watching at this point in the season. I think they recognize how last postseason you missed Tyrese at full strength. You obviously didn't have Mathurin, so they were able to get Ben a couple games off, Tyrese a couple games off. But you're absolutely right. The last 3 games I don't think could have gone any worse. What
do you think is the reasoning for – we can go kind of player by player here, Scott, but I'll begin with – and I know that it's been a long topic of conversation back and forth. Jarace Walker. I thought Walker last night could have been a good defensive option on Giddey, yet he still didn't get in really until late. His minutes have kind of yo-yoed a little bit. Your overall thoughts on where he is in the rotation and why he's not maybe even more consistently in the rotation?
Yeah, so I understood until here recently why he was out of it, right? It's like, who do you take out? The challenge is now, though, you've been down a couple of guys, and you've had the window of opportunity to throw him out there. And I would especially add these last couple games when nothing has gone right. It feels like the focus, the concentration, just the details. Like it's 2 guys running into each other, or it's throwing to the wrong team, or just things you do not expect. Rather than I put less credence into, you starting 1 of 13 from outside. This team needs shooting. It's always needed shooting. Those dry spells will happen. So I thought last night would have been the perfect opportunity. And we saw in the third quarter, Jake, where a complete line change. I get that for a couple of reasons. One, you send a message to the starters, and at the same time, you're also resting them, thinking ahead to tonight when you're already down 20. But it was others reserves getting in before Jarace, including Johnny Furphy. But he was fruitful, eight rebounds in his stint there. I would like to see more of Jarace, especially if you have a couple players that are injured and out of the rotation, because I think what we've seen in the last month has warranted that. I really like his length, his attention to detail, getting in the passing lanes, him knocking down that outside shot. I don't think, from what I've seen, I don't think he's done anything wrong to not earn a chance every now and then.
If you look at the standings right now in the NBA, the Pacers are 6.5 up on Orlando. Orlando's the 8th seed. Obviously, you want to avoid that 7-8 game, right? So what I'm getting at is there's 19 games left, 18 games left, something like that. Are we in panic mode yet based on these 3 games, or is this the anomaly based on health?
I think this is anomaly based on Ty being out, along with having this little road stretch, right? They're gone for 6 of 7 games. The trouble with the Atlanta thing here is it goes back to what we've said for several years now, is they always play down to their level of competition. And Atlanta is that type of team where they're not better than the Pacers. They aren't. But the Pacers did not rise to that moment. I don't think this is a fearful time or a time to panic, but it is somewhat of a reality check, Jake. I think it's a time when a lot of these players were being asked and thinking about how high they could go and what seed do you want to be, where in return you just got to worry about winning and playing the right way, and they have not done that recently.
I want to play for you, Scott. Eddie, if you could, cue this up. Rick Carlisle joined the morning show this morning, Scott, and I want our listeners to hear this as well. And Kevin Bowen, who has been, like all of us, a supporter of Benedict Mathurin, asked Rick Carlisle a question about Benedict Mathurin and his play of late and some of the yo-yo also of Mathurin's contributions. And Rick Carlisle had the following to say. Listen in particular to the second half of this, Scott, and then we'll get your reaction. Here we go.
A lot of points one game and not a lot the next. And he's an aggressive young player. I spent a lot of time with him in the gym over the last week as he's prepared to come back. He did a lot of really good things, but it's not all about points. And last night our entire starting group struggled, and he was one of them. And tonight's a quick turnaround. So I talked to him a little bit after the game about some of the stuff that went on. The stuff with officials and him constantly talking to officials is stuff that's got to stop. Creates a distraction for him, a distraction for our team. We need him very badly right now, but we need all our guys to be undistracted and playing at their best level. And so this will be a great opportunity for him to bounce back tonight as well.
Now, here's the thing, Scott, to me. I want you to comment on your reaction to his comments about the chirping with officials, and then I'll tell you my thought on it.
I would agree. I especially noticed that the last couple of games, and I would even take it a step further. It seemed like too much chirping with the opponent. Now, he is a super competitive guy, but I would agree. It does seem like that has got his attention shifted in the wrong areas, and when you're not producing on the court, you think about all the other little things. And so if I agree with what Rick had to say there. And I'm not surprised at any of that, especially because of how hard Ben likes to be coached, too. If he's doing something wrong, he wants to hear about it. But it's also hard to temper down that competitive juice that makes him also special.
I thought it was somewhat of a backhanded compliment because you don't – when you say things like, that's a distraction and our team needs to not be distracted – that is an indirect way of saying we are anticipating and expecting when you're on the floor that you're the leader of the group you're on the floor with. And I don't know that you say that to somebody that you think of in a lesser role. But to me, that is Rick Carlisle stating right there that Mathurin is a player that they look to for leadership for the rest of the roster. And I think that's a real compliment.
I don't know about leadership as much as hard play and competitive fire and attacking the basket. Is what stands out to me. Like, I'm looking at his stats in the last 2 games. Could not be more opposite. 1 for 1 at the free throw line last game, 8 of 10. The game before that when he went for 30 in a loss. I think it's more alluding to those areas and the focusing on all those little details that he's done a nice job of working with the coaching staff at the early part of the season, right, of making the right basketball play, keeping your head up, finding the right pass, while also being who you are and attacking. I don't look to him for leadership. I look for him to the hard play and getting to the basket.
I think, with that second unit, I guess, and we've gone over this a lot, and you tell me if you agree with this. I think we had that discussion as to whether or not it was better Mathurin starts Neesmith off bench, Neesmith starts Mathurin off bench. I think we've now gotten our answer there, have we not?
I think so. I think it's still at least what I believe to be true, which is Neesmith start, Mathurin off the bench, and being the focus guy with that unit and being the star of that group once Ty is back. Is that how you feel as well?
Totally, because I think – and look, Neesmith – look, I'm almost like biased here, right? I just love Neesmith. I love the way he plays. I love the energy he brings, and I love the fact that he can score for you and seemingly has zero ego. And I know that you need guys at times to have ego, but I think it is so valuable, Scott, to just have a guy that can go in and do whatever is asked. I love guys that do whatever is asked, and that guy to me is the absolute – I think if you had a kid that is getting ready to play middle school basketball and you took him to a Pacer game and you said, you know what, son or daughter, if you want to stay on the floor and be the kind of player that a coach is not going to take out, let me show you the guy that you need to watch. And I would make them watch Aaron Neesmith.
Yeah, I 100% agree, especially given just all those little things that he does and doesn't care for the credit, like you mentioned. And I like the fact that, he knows his role. He knows to be prepared at the three-point line. He's shooting 41% from range this month. But more than anything, to your point, he provides those little things, and he provides defense, and that's been the biggest issue. We can all point to the poor shooting and the poor start last game. They don't get stops. That changes everything. And obviously Tyrese being out impacts both ends of the floor. But that's the number one thing, again, why Aaron needs to be out there is changes to the positive start defensively, and he's the better defender.
By the way, Scott, is Bismack Biyombo still in the league?
He is. He signed a rest of season deal with the Spurs.
I was wondering why I keep getting ads for the Spurs.com to go onto their website and buy a custom jersey. As soon as I buy a Bismack Biyombo jersey that he's going to sign somewhere else on a 10-day, right?
You know why you want a Bismack Biyombo jersey on it, right?
Yeah, because his name's Bismack Biyombo.
Exactly.
Doesn't he just seem like he'd be a friendly fellow?
He does. He reminds me of a Jan Mahimi, who was just the nicest guy. And was great for the locker room and had so many varied interests.
Now, Jan Mahimi was like you. He was a fashionista, right?
He was. He is. He did all this before it was in vogue, before Tyrese and Miles and Neesmith got into that, for example. Yep.
Isn't he
He's from French? So
yeah, he's French,
now,
right?
I think it's another Paris fashion show, so that makes all kinds of sense.
Jan Mahimi is no longer in the league, right? Isn't he? Is he retired altogether, or is he playing elsewhere?
Yeah.
Like overseas?
No, he retired from the league about 3 or 4 years ago. And we did get to see him, I guess it'd be 6 weeks ago when the Pacers were over in Paris. He was doing some kind of NBA event with the league about every day out there.
Scott, if you could live, you hit the Powerball right now, okay? And you've got to pick, you win the Powerball and you got to pick 3 cities. One where you're going to have your permanent home you're going to build, one where you're going to have like a condo, and then one where you just have basically a flat to visit periodically. And you cannot pick Indianapolis. What 3 cities you going with?
Wow. Now that is ultimate put on the spot right there. So I think I'm having a flat or whatever in like LA.
Okay.
I think having an opportunity there to just, I just need sunshine.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay.
I think in a big city as well. I haven't been there yet, but I've heard nothing but good things. I think my getaway, like off the map, would be over in Croatia.
Okay.
I've heard amazing things. There's water.
I have heard that as well. Yep.
And then I feel like my everyday place would probably be in Florida. Good golf, good taxes, all that sort of thing.
Okay, fair enough. Man, my everyday, that's tough, right? I would definitely do it'd be Paris or Barcelona, one of those two. Edinburgh,
Leaving the country for your everyday?
No. No, I'm talking about, for the condo, I'd go Paris or
Sure.
Barcelona. Just a flat to be able to go and hang out from time to time would be Edinburgh, Scotland, but the weather's terrible. And then my house itself, if it can't be in Indiana, that's tough. Southern California would be pretty nice. If I had the money for the space, man, just the weather alone is absolutely fantastic. What's coming up on Fieldhouse Files in terms of your coverage or things that you're anticipating NBA-wise with the Pacers and Bucks tonight?
Sure. By the way, I'd throw San Diego in there. Have not been there, but I've obviously heard nothing but amazing things. That might be my go-to spot.
If you look outside right now, Scott, it's like this 363 days a year in San Diego.
Yeah, you can't get tired.
And they have a zoo. By the way, they have a zoo in San Diego that has koalas. And when I was in San Diego, I was highly anticipating going to see the koalas, and they were off to mate. And so they didn't have them out on display, which was good news for them, right? But a complete buzzkill for me, just for what it's worth. Fabulous zoo.
Yeah. No, that's good. Coming up,
just don't go on orgy day. If you go on orgy day, you don't get to see anything. Anyway, go ahead.
I'll leave that where it is. We talked to Sophie Cunningham's fever today, so I'll be writing about that. I also want to touch on finally get around to my big feature on Connor McCaffrey. So I'll have that coming up this week about him at Butler, along with him and his time with the Pacers last year will come up later this week before the Big Ten tournament.
Well, I was going to say, and then the Pacers tonight with the Bucks, and then they basically step aside and let the Big Ten take over the Fieldhouse for a couple of days, right?
Exactly. That's why this is their only home game over basically a 2-week stretch, and why it's even more important to go get out on the road. They've been good on the road this season after that first stretch, but they haven't been good lately.
Halliburton, we do or don't see him tonight?
I expect for him to play.
Okay, we'll see. It's a big one, big one with the Bucks. Scott, appreciate it as always.
Yep. Thanks, Jake.
Scott Agnes joining us on the program. Fieldhouse Files, where you can read his work and see all of his coverage with the Pacers. Now, Eddie, you said you have not been to San Diego, correct?
I have.
Did you go to the zoo?
Yeah.
Were the koalas out?
Yes.
Did they seem relaxed and happy?
They did, but not in that regard.
Okay. Do you know why koalas sleep 23 and a half hours a day?
Why is that?
True story. Do you know why koalas sleep? They sleep 23 and a half hours a day. Do you know why?
No.
Because koalas, in terms of their digestive system allows them to process and digest very few foods, primarily and almost exclusively the eucalyptus leaf, which, number one, has a sedative oil in it, which makes them drowsy, and number two, does not provide enough caloric intake for them to then be able to do the activities other than essentially take care of their young and scrounge for more eucalyptus leaves and then crash out again.
Well, it says that they sleep for 20 hours a day due to their conserving energy due to their low energy diet. So
the low caloric intake of their diet. Does it mention anything about the sedatives of the eucalyptus leaf?
No. I didn't fully dive into all the articles about why koalas sleep 20 hours a day.
Now, what about the sloth? Do you like the sloths?
I do like sloths.
They have sloths at the Indianapolis Zoo, right? You ever see it? Like you see videos of those people in, Central America that like a sloth is crossing the road and it takes like 5.5 hours so people get out and pick it up and carry it across. They're rather slow moving.
Their lengthy sleeping behavior, talking about the koalas, makes it hard for people to decide if they're nocturnal or diurnal.
Diurnal?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What does the diurnal mean? I could see biurnal, meaning you sleep both in day and night. But what does diurnal mean? Doesn't mean that you pass in your sleep, right?
No, it refers to the activities or behaviors that occur during the daytime. That's all it says.
So if you sleep during the day...
It can describe animals that are active during the day and sleep at night, as well as...
Well, then, so we're diurnal?
Phenomena that happen once every day.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. All I know is my goal in life is to, when I was supposed to go to Australia, and I told Michael, my buddy in Australia, I'm like, look, and we had it all mapped out. When I come to Australia, we're going to the Gold Coast, but we were going to go to a koala sanctuary where you get to like pick up and like cradle a koala. And I was like super excited about it. And then COVID happened and I couldn't go. It's still a major, major, major like hope of mine, just so you know. And then kangaroos, which apparently are just like deer around there, and they're a nuisance, and they punch people, and they drink and smoke a lot.
Kick, you mean?
That too. They do a little of everything. Kangaroos apparently over there are like a major nuisance. $14 million for a backup quarterback. Does that mean $14 million for a starting quarterback? Vegas has weighed in on who they think is going to be the starter day one, week one for the Indianapolis Colts. We'll give you those numbers next. Dude's my hero. Rockwell, baby. I mean, yeah, his name's Kennedy Gordy, and his dad was the founder of Motown Records. But he's like, I want to be a music star. I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I can record some hits, even though my dad is the founder of Motown. So they're like, you should probably change your name so it doesn't look like nepotism. So he's like, okay, I'll do that, and then I'll come up with a song, and you know what I should do is just get a childhood friend that people would know his voice to sing the chorus. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and get Michael Jackson to do it and get Jermaine to sing some background. And then the whole song is basically this, right? Any point you cue it up, you get this part where he's basically just talking, okay? And the music video for this part was awesome. And then he's like, but I really need a hook. I need a hook that like people will latch onto and suddenly remember Rockwell and play it on radio 40 years from now. Oh, here we go. I wonder if anybody will know it's Michael. Maybe they won't notice. It's a great song, though. So Daniel Jones is at $14 million in Indianapolis, shortly at least. When I say shortly, I mean he'll be here shortly, as the backup quarterback that may be the starting quarterback. Now, the interesting thing is this. The Las Vegas odds are out on who is going to be the Colts starting quarterback in week 1 of the 2025 regular season. Eddie, you're the degenerate of the group, so I will let you explain to me what this means, even though I know. For those that don't know.
What?
Anthony Richardson is minus 250. So if you put down $100 for Anthony Richardson to be the starting quarterback on week number 1, that means you will make how much money?
Oh, boy, I'm not good with math. All I know is if you bet $250, you win $100, and if you bet $10, you win $25.
Okay, so you bet $250, you would win $100 on Anthony Richardson. Okay, Daniel Jones is plus 170.
So you win $1.70 for every dollar you bet.
So that would mean that Vegas is assuming that Anthony Richardson is going to be the starter.
Or no, sorry, it's not $1.70. You win 1.7 times whatever you bet.
Right. So they are obviously, Vegas is assuming that the starter is going to be Anthony Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have the breaking news sounder by chance? This just in, people who are in Vegas have never watched the Colts. Kidding aside, though, I do think that Daniel Jones is interesting because statistically speaking, I think Jones, he brings to the table what they're hoping Anthony Richardson can do. He has a better passing completion percentage, 64% in his career. He doesn't do as well what Richardson does well, but he does do it, running the football. He is a guy that can run. He's a guy that's kind of a rhythm passer. He does not have the deep ball threat in his arm that Anthony Richardson has. I'm being flippant and curt a little bit in my Anthony Richardson take here. But Anthony Richardson is a very likable person from the outside. I don't know him personally. But I've watched now the documentary about him in high school, and I see the way his teammates kind of rally around him. There's a lot about Anthony Richardson that you like, that you want to see turn into success and have it work out. However, the Colts have pushed every button possible. There's no great – where the Colts erred and did him a disservice was basically handing him the keys. Because they handed him the keys and then said, now we want you to, show us that you've earned this. Well, I didn't have to. And that did him a bit of a disservice because I think that he just thought right away, okay, well, I'm the guy. And yeah, I'll get here at 8 o'clock and I'll be here till 5. But you talk to anybody that's played quarterback in the NFL and they'll tell you, look, man, you got to be in there 6 a.m. And you don't have a life for the most part. And you are constantly looking at film. You know, the classic story of Jamarcus Russell, that the Raiders gave him a videotape and said, go home and watch this tape and let us know what you think of the footwork that we're showing you on tape. And so he went and they gave him a blank tape. And then he came back on Monday and said, oh, yeah, man, I totally saw what you guys were talking about. I really looked at and studied the film hard. And they're like, yeah, we gave him a blank tape. So they called us bluff and outed him right there. I'm not saying that you do that with Richardson, but I just think that there appears to be, they've tried to push every button. The ultimate wake-up call is losing your job. And yes, he wasn't cut, but he lost his job as a starter. That's wake-up call number one. And then he comes back, and he had some moments. I mean, in New York against the Jets, he had moments for sure. But seemingly, even with that, what's interesting to me is that when Anthony Richardson, he's probably played his best most recently. And when he, down the stretch against the Jets, won that game. I mean, he basically won that game for them in New York. And you saw right before your eyes, okay, this guy's kind of arrived.
And New England.
And New England.
Drive.
Right? And even with that, they felt like they still needed to do something to wake him up by announcing that he is not going to be given the position and now he's going to have to earn it. If he didn't earn it based on those two things and based on the fact that he was a top 5 pick and based on the flashes that you've seen, that means that there is still something very glaring to those that are around him the closest and the most consistently. Clearly, there is doubt in the building. And now the question becomes, is that doubt such that they are basically deciding that they're moving on from it? Or is that doubt more so that they felt like they shorted him by not making him work harder with competition, and they are legitimately, openly throwing this out there and saying, may the best man win, and saying, we're going to win either way here because we're going to get somebody who had to earn it. I think what Chris Ballard has done here is Ballard seemingly may have even lengthened his timeline, because one of two things is the case. Either they brought in Daniel Jones at $14 million because they no longer believe in Anthony Richardson, but they can't say that because it's egg on the face. So they make Daniel Jones, quote-unquote, earn it, air quotes, and become the starter, and then hope that Daniel Jones gets that second lease on life and becomes Baker Mayfield in Tampa or Sam Darnold in Minnesota until the last 2 weeks of the year, where stability, now all of a sudden they find it underneath them and they become a good quarterback. If that happens, then Ballard walks away unscathed because they're now all of a sudden they're flirting with the playoffs and they're moving in the right direction, and they short up their cornerback room and their defensive back room, and now they have a quarterback that they extend if he plays well. Or he comes in, it wakes up Richardson, and Richardson becomes the quarterback that they drafted him to be, and bada boom, now the guy that is attached at the hip of Chris Ballard is performing, and Chris Ballard, it all worked out. The only way that this goes bust for Chris Ballard is if Daniel Jones becomes the starter and then becomes Carson Wentz. And at that point, you would have to think, like I said, at that point, Biff Ward, her telephone becomes a Christmas tree because she's the real estate agent, for those that don't know. And now all of a sudden you've got Chris Ballard, Daniel Jones, and Anthony Richardson all calling. And I know Richardson's got another year on his deal beyond this one. But I'm going to go back to, and I'll probably say this until August, $14 million to me indicates that means one of two things. They're either totally committed towards the last ditch effort of waking up and pushing Anthony Richardson, or they've turned the page altogether but they can't just say that, and so they just signed their starter. And am I saying that because I think Daniel Jones is a legit starting quarterback in the NFL? No. He's been a starter, and he has shown he's basically Anthony Richardson. He's a guy that showed flashes in New York, enough that they gave him a big-time contract and then decided, man, we did this too early. But who were the big targets he was throwing to in the early part of his career? And he had Saquon Barkley, but Barkley was basically Anthony Richardson. He was hurt all the time, right? Think about that. New York let Barkley walk. I go back to, in the back of my mind, and I hope I'm wrong. I really am pulling for Anthony Richardson. I hope I'm wrong. Because like I said, he's football Jonathan Bender. You see it, and you start daydreaming about where this guy can go. But I cannot get past the thought of the fact that the people that would know him best are the ones that are the last to commit. And the people that are around him the most are the ones that felt that they had to pay $14 million for an insurance policy. That, to me, tells me a lot. The Pivot Bar and Balcony right across from the field house where JV is setting up. He will be there until 6, previewing talking obviously about the Colts, but also previewing Pacers and Bucks as they get set at the field house tonight. Big one. And Milwaukee, Giannis has been a little banged up himself, although I think he's playing tonight, I would assume, right?
How many points does he score tonight, Jake?
Boy. If he plays, he's day-to-day, right? But aren't we all? 38.
Yeah, it's got that kind of feel to it, doesn't it?
I mean, he's pretty unstoppable. He's a darn good player.
They've been playing him around 30, 34 minutes as post-All-Star break.
Have you heard caller to the program, Mo, from Northwest Ohio?
I don't think so.
Colts fan Mo.
Is this the guy you went to dinner with Stephen Holder?
Yes. He's coming to the game tonight.
Oh, nice. Is he going with you?
He is.
Wow.
He's driving over from Northwest Ohio.
Oh, my gosh. I feel so bad. Yeah, he drove all the way from Northwest Ohio just to spend time with you.
Can you blame him?
I can blame him.
Do you realize, Eddie, that you get 3 hours a day to do what people will drive 2.5 hours for?
I feel like people would be more inclined to hang out with me if they were willing.
A little quality time of vitamin Q, right?
Vitamin Q, really.
I'm just telling you.
Were you that desperate to find a friend that you had to go phone somebody from
yes,
Ohio?
I've run out of people in Indiana to take the games. You are actually correct, yes.
I'm sure Derek would go with you, but I don't know if you...
I don't know. I spend enough time around him.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, all professionally speaking.
How long are you two been married?
Don't ask. Too long. But it is a big one tonight at the Fieldhouse. If you look at the standings, and let's check it right here, because, for example, the Australians are coming.
Really?
Michael is freaking out because they were just here, I realized, but he said, oh, man, I got a flash sale on airfare, so I'm coming back in April.
Are they bringing Tam Tams? Can they please bring Tam Tams?
Tim Tams.
Tim Tams.
Yeah, I'll tell them. We'll get an order in for you. I don't know if they have ketchup chips over there, but if you can bring some of those, because now with the tariffs, chips are it's become too expensive. He's freaking out because he bought tickets for what he plans to be the playoff games for the Pacers, but he bought them for assuming that they would be a 6 seed or higher, and that they would not be in the position of having to play a play-in game and getting bounced. And I said, well, at the very least, you can just come for 10 days and hang out. And who wouldn't want to do that? Hang out in Indy in April? Right now, the Pacers are the 5 seed. They are a game behind Milwaukee. What's that?
Tied with Detroit.
And tied with Detroit, yes. They are 5 games clear of Atlanta for the 7.
And they have the head-to-head.
Man, that really hurt them, though, losing those 2 to Atlanta. But so with 5 games, they've got, 19 games left? Tonight's big. I mean, tonight is really big. And whoever would have thought, Eddie, Detroit, give credit to Detroit. That's a pretty quiet 7 games over 500, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, they had a hot stretch where they won 8 in a row, I think, last month. And that's what has allowed them to be in the position that they are in right now. And Cade Cunningham has been really, really good for them all season long. Jaron Duran has been more consistent. And the real story for them and key for them this season has been Malik Beasley. He's been one of the best three-point shooters, and he's doing it at a high volume. He's over 40% from the field. He's not
he's
the
a
best,
microwave scorer, right?
But yeah.
Who are the 3 best teams in the league, your opinion, NBA?
I would go with the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Okay.
The Denver Nuggets.
Okay.
And the Cleveland Cavaliers.
You think Cleveland's – I mean, I realize by record, Cleveland's won 14 in a row. They're 54-10. Now, here's the other question, by the way.
Yep.
54-10.
And Boston's right there for me. It's just
See, I think Boston is the one that look, you're the best until you're not. And that combo of Brown and Tatum is just so,
they have been ravaged by injuries for most of the season. I don't know how many games they've played at full strength with Porzingis, Tatum, Brown, Holiday, White, Horford, Pritchard. They've been so plagued all season long.
Let me ask you this. This would be a good question for Mark Boyle. And you're the next closest thing because you absorb everything he says.
That would be Pat Boylan, but
the Cleveland Cavaliers are 54-10.
Yes.
Okay? That means they have played 64 games.
Yes.
To be 500 after 64 games, you would have to be 32-32.
Yes.
Does that mean that the Cleveland Cavaliers are 22 games above 500 or 44 games above 500?
They are 44.
Are they?
Yes.
So you take the benchmark from the loss column, not the win column, or not the total games column.
That's how everybody does it.
I don't know about that. Do they?
Yes.
Because you could very easily say they're 22 games over 500 because 500 would be 32-32, and they are 22 games beyond that. It's a story problem, but which one would you go with? I tend to agree with you, but I think technically speaking, the latter is correct. Like I would bet you that Mark Boyle would tell you that they're 22 games over 500.
Nope. 44.
Have you asked him that?
No. I hear him every night listen to teams being, X games over 500, and it's always in
so he
reference
goes
to,
based on the win column, not the loss column, or the loss column, not the win column. I think it's a fair point, though, and a decent question. What is on the big evening agenda for you tonight, Eddie Garrison?
Well, you know what's on the agenda for me, Jake. I will be producing Pacers Bucks tonight. Pregame starts at 7 o'clock right here on these airwaves with Pat Boylan with the pregame show. You'll hear from Eddie White in the World's Greatest postgame show after the game as well.
And again, if you are headed down to the game, you don't even have to be going to the game. If you're just in the downtown vicinity or area, then great place to stop by, have a cold beer, Diet Coke, perfectly sufficient.
I know what you're doing.
And
you're
listen to
game,
J&B.
right?
What's that?
You're going to the game, right?
I am. I am going to lunch right now, and then I am going to the game. And Mo is driving over from Northwest Ohio, and we're going to enjoy it.
So you're going to lunch, and I didn't get an invite?
And we will. That is correct.
What is this about?
I'm going with my 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Shadio.
Oh.
Who, because she introduced me to the best book ever written, Watership Down, and I've read it like 16 times since. But J&B will be with you coming up next. He will preview the Pacers-Bucks, talk plenty about the big story of the day, which is Daniel Jones joining the Colts. We will recap the first of that and continue talking about the second. We'll do it all tomorrow, and we thank you for listening to Query & Company.